Hello, revolutionary thinking. Here I have my interview with someone who I thought wasn't alive anymore. He was born a long time ago, and he's written some very interesting books. Sir Francis Bacon.
Well, hello, first of all, but that's not exactly who I am.
Oh, that's interesting, but your picture looked like that.
Yeah, well, that's my picture. That's who I represent myself as, at least in the autonomy world, but that is not me.
Okay, then who are you?
My name is Daniel McCarthy, and I'm from Cleveland, Ohio. I am not from London, and I was never a Lord Chancellor.
Ah, I see. Okay, my bad. Here we have our interview with Daniel McCarthy, who is from Cleveland, Ohio. So, Daniel, as you know, you also, in addition to being an autonomy student, you've also joined my server, a server that talks about philosophy. What is it that you like about philosophy?
What is it that I like about the love of wisdom? Um, it's an interesting question. Um, well, I mean, fundamentally, it's something to do. We've got this cognitive function, we've got this mind, and I just feel like, well, you ever sit for too long, or when you're sick, you're stuck in bed, and you get that feeling where you just feel your body beginning to atrophy. You haven't been stretching your arms or your legs out very much. Everything feels just like crusty.
Mm.
Well, I think that if we don't exercise our philosophical muscle, our cognitive muscle, then it results in this sort of calcification or atrophy of that muscle. And frankly, I just don't like that. I would prefer to have a malleable, open, dynamic mind, something that I can utilize and employ in my day-to-day life and thinking about my future, talking to other people, having good conversations. So philosophy is a really good vehicle for opening yourself up to the world and making sure you don't just kind of get that bed rot, you know?
Ah, makes sense. And you mean like, when you stretch your arms out like that, you can kind of feel the muscles and the bones, and it feels good. And that's why, actually, have you heard that they think it's inhumane to keep animals under these confined conditions where they can't stretch out? Because that feels, have you ever heard something like that on the news? They said like it's in like when they cage them up too much and even the animals can't stretch, they're calling that like not a good thing to do.
I don't know that I've ever heard anybody specifically mention that, but I totally agree. That is absolutely cruel. And one thing I do know about that is this is maybe a little tangential for what you want to talk about, but briefly, um, maybe you're familiar with decades ago, studies were done with rats. And the purpose of these studies was to show that, let's say, for example, cocaine is fundamentally addictive no matter what species of mammal you are. And in these studies, they had rats in boxes. And over a period of time, the rats would wind up choosing cocaine over their food. And so the scientists said, well, shit, this must mean that we're just cognitively or neurologically slaves to this addictive substance. But what they didn't consider was that all of these rats were in confined spaces without social interaction, without anything to do, and without room to really stretch out. So decades later, another guy comes along and says, well, this study doesn't make any sense. Let's build a whole community for rats with things to do, toys to play with, interactions to have, and then way off in the corner, we'll put the cocaine. And then what wound up happening, most rats wanted nothing to do with the coke. Only a select few who couldn't make friends went. So I
Wow.
just think that's an interesting point, what
Yes,
you were saying about
yes,
confinement and how it'll
yes.
affect the way that we interact with the world.
Because I find it that when I'm confined, like let's say there was a lock in this door, and all I have is like what, my TV and this computer and maybe a few things like that. But like out there, I can open the door. There are more activities to do outside, to drive somewhere, to meet people and here. But yeah, that's a great idea, which actually piggybacks on the subject that I wanted to talk about, you know, as to do with our schooling experience. The classroom is confined.
Yeah, indeed. That's a good parallel with the rats and the cocaine, right?
Right, right. So it just seems to me that, you know, when I was in school, I felt as if they were confining my mind and kind of like to the subjects that I was learning, and it felt like you don't really have the time to think for yourself about yourself. Has your experience been similar?
Oh yeah, absolutely. There was not much of a focus on learning or getting to know yourself. I'll just put it that way. Getting to know yourself, what you want to do. Now, granted, there were special times in the classroom over the years that they would put aside. Like I remember, for instance, in fourth grade, we were given the task of writing an autobiography because, you know, fourth grade is a great time to take a step back and really figure out what you've done and where you're going. But so that was, one could argue, an instance of them saying, hey, get to know yourself. What is it that you want out of life? But retrospectively, what irritates me even about that is that it was only okay to do so, to go inward and examine yourself when it was part of the assignment, when it was part of the curriculum. So if I were to do that, if I were to sit and write notes about where I wanted to go with my life in math class, well, that would be frowned upon. That's not what we're doing right now. It's only when it's provisional self-examination. And they come up with the criteria. They say, answer these 5 questions about you, and then if you do it correctly, then you get the A or whatever. So
Yeah.
they made this sort of cosmetic pass at making the students introspect. But I never really detected any sense of genuine interest in that. And they certainly weren't cultivating a sense of um, introspection within me, because I am a highly introspective person and I found nothing but strife in the school system. I didn't, I mean, I wasn't a great student, but that was just because I was lazy. But I, um, I never got along particularly with any teachers. I never found any comfort or solace within the system. I wanted out of that building as fast as I could possibly get out of it. So, yeah, I would think that even though they would try to make it seem like they were, you know, making it about the students and trying to tailor the curriculum to the kids, it could only be cosmetic. It could only be a superficial thing, because the fundamental aspect of the school system, which continued to affect all of us, even those of us who participated in these autobiographical exercises, we were still put in these cognitive boxes where we think about ourselves when it's okay to think about ourselves, and then we do this when it's okay to do that, etc. If that makes any sense.
Reframe the laziness. I thought I was lazy, or I had some kind of, as they put it, you know, learning disability. But I like to say that they had a reality disability. And when I grew up, I found out that I wasn't lazy. I'm not lazy when it comes to the things that I'm passionate about. I'm very active when it comes to the things that I am passionate about. But the thing is like, if you tell somebody to go play tennis and they'd rather be playing basketball, you'd say, "Oh, you're lazy?" But they don't want to play tennis and they want to play basketball. When it comes to basketball, they wouldn't be lazy, and when it comes to tennis, they would be lazy. But that's because that these conditions you put under people are very arbitrary. So what do you think of that? You think that even that thing when you would call yourself lazy, you just weren't passionate about what was going on?
Yeah, that's absolutely what it is. I mean, one thing that I would hear from parents and teachers consistently throughout my schooling career, as they call it, was, well, you're smart, but you just don't apply yourself. And it's like, well, right, because none of this is applicable to me. So, you know, right, you're correct in pointing out that lazy is, well, lazy is a lazy term for me to use in that context. So yeah, it's not that I lack passion for things that I'm interested in. I mean, I'm here, I'm in autonomy, I'm working on a number of projects, I'm working very hard on them, and I have done so in the past. So it's not fundamentally laziness. It's that I'm obstinate and
Disengaged with.
difficult. I don't want to do something unless I want to do something. And obviously, life demands that there are times when we have to do things we don't want to do, and I'm fine with that. I'm not going to complain. But when you impose a 7-hour day on me for 12 years, then we're going to have some problems. And we did. I didn't do well because I didn't want to do well. I refused to spend my time filling out homework assignments, whatever. Just wasn't going to do it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And have you ever heard the old saying from the teachers that when you grow up, you'll understand that all this was so good for you after you leave? Have you heard that
Oh,
before?
over and over again for
Over
most of
and
my
over
life.
again.
Yeah,
Okay, so how old are you?
I'm 24.
I'm 30. And do you feel as if now looking back to what they said that you don't understand how much is this going to help you, that they were telling the truth, or were they lying to you?
I think that they were full of shit, and whether or not that means, I'm sorry, do you mind if I swear on your,
That's fine.
okay.
It's no problem with me as long as you don't just do it for shock value and you
Yeah.
really mean what you say. And I could feel that you really did mean it. And I
Well, yeah, the reason I use that terminology here is because maybe some of them were lying and maybe some of them just bought into it themselves. I don't know, I'm not that person. But regardless of which of those two things it was, I still feel that they were not correct. And what irritates me now is that even though I've been out of school for 5, 6 years now, right? 6 years,
Mhm.
um, I still hear that kind of language being used. Like I work with somebody who's in her 60s, and anytime a political or ideological conversation comes up, she gets very angry with whoever she's talking to. I've learned to not engage unless I want to have a good laugh. But one thing that she always wants to pull against younger people is, well, you just don't get it. You're too young. Wait till you're my age. Then you'll see how the world works. And what amuses me about that mindset is it's like, all right, well, my grandfather's 10 years older than you, and he disagrees with every word you're saying. So, according to your logic, when you're just not old enough to get his point. Well, then what about my other friend who's 10 years younger than you? He disagrees too. When is the change going to flip? When is he going to suddenly one day wake up and agree with
Right.
you?
Like the magic age fairy is just gonna come down with its wand and do that. So
Right, ding, you're a Republican now. Ding, you're a
right,
Democrat. Like, what?
exactly. I
As
mean,
if we're all
that
on
is such
one.
an ignorant way of looking at things. So I said it with this example. You have a farm boy who's 10 years old, and you have a city man who's 70 years old. Can that 70-year-old city man go to the 10-year-old farm boy and say, I'm older than you, I can tell you how to run your farm, when he's never been in the farm?
Yeah,
And
that's
vice versa.
right. That's a good way
Right.
of putting it. It's that simple, really.
Really, age and experience are two different things. One does not relate to the other. If I'm, no matter how old I am, if I didn't have an experience with something that I'm dealing with, I have no right to go to someone who's very young, no matter how young, and he's experiencing something, but I didn't have those experiences, and just automatically use my age as this be all end all to my supreme knowledge of whatever subject it is that's being talked
That is the zenith of intellectual laziness because you're just closing yourself off from anything. I want to hear how these people talk to people that are their own age or
about.
older than them. It's like, well, then what? What do you do? Are you logical in those instances, but not with anybody else? I doubt it.
Right.
So you'll just pick some other thing to harp on, some other ad hominem.
It's
And
just an excuse.
it's
Right.
just disappointing because I think that while school doesn't explicitly ingrain in us something like, call people out for their age if you're arguing with them, it certainly makes allowances for that sort of mindset to build. I would say partially because the school system is designed to really just get us out into the
Yeah.
move the labor force as fast as possible.
It's actually failing on that too. Because I remember when I left school and I was looking for a very, very basic, easy, repetitive job, I would say I had a lack of experience. So it just boggled my mind as the zenith of stupidity on the part of the schools that they didn't even care to give me that experience when I was there. And then I was scratching my head and I was saying, so let me get this straight. In those 12 years that they had to prepare me for the rest of my life, and I can't even get a basic, easy job because those jobs are asking for the experience, and that is the experience I could have gained when I was in those schools. And I just kind of reflected on that, and I said that, wow, the whole system is not only failing by what we've talked about, but even by its own standards, by its own think about it. The whole reason they tell us that we're there is for the job at the end of the tunnel. And when that's not even there at the end of that, you got to be telling yourself, what's happening? What are they doing?
Yeah, it's definitely true that school is not the best way to achieve employment, even something menial, though that is at least when you get to middle school and high school, they tell you
That's what they tell you.
well, that's what they're going for. But yeah, you're absolutely right that as far as creating competence in the real world, school does an abysmal job. And even colleges, maybe you remember maybe 5, 7 years ago, there was some hullabaloo about a college, I forget which one, some law school. They were saying that, most people who, or let's just say, for example, 70%, 80% of students who come into our graduate program will find employment, within 6 months of graduating. And so the propaganda of that, it implies to the person consuming it, it's like, wow, if I go in, I have a 80% chance of winding up a lawyer. But when it was investigated, it turned out that when they said 80% of people were employed after graduating, they weren't telling you that a lot of those, they were counting people who were employed at McDonald's, Starbucks, Walmart, Home Depot. They weren't just saying lawyers. They're saying, yeah, they had jobs, but it wasn't the job we.
Right. It reminds me, when Obama does his State of the Union and he's like, we've added 1 million jobs to our economy. And it's like, what kind of jobs? Jobs that a PhD and a high school level person can both do? Then what is the point of that if you've added those jobs? What kind? Just jobs to keep people bored and busy and struggling? Is that something to be proud of? Is that they don't go into the specifics. They just give us the generalities, and a lot of people who are just, I'm sorry to say this, sheeple, just cheer and go crazy, and it's like, step back, stop going with these generalities and ask these questions about specifics. But we've been conditioned to not do that.
Yeah, for sure. And regardless of whether it's the president or a college or your high school teacher telling you about jobs and whatever our public presumptions about jobs are, the point of it at the end of the day is that what school does and what these jobs are just the manifestations of intellectual dependency. School creates it and the job continues it throughout our lives. You're dependent in school, you're dependent on, well, your parents, of course, but you have this state-sanctioned responsibility or duty to be in this institution, to be properly trained to go out into the society, and then you fulfill a specific function within that society, you receive your check, and then you die. Right. It's all about this dependence, and I think that is fundamentally disempowering. I mean, and we don't even need to get into that. That's something we both understand.
Yeah, but now they're even failing in that. Because when you graduate school, automation is taking all those jobs away.
Yep, exactly.
So what is it? What is it now? It doesn't make any sense to me. Zero at all. It's just pure insanity at this point. Because if you're trained to become a robot, which the schools do, then your job will be taken away by a robot. So now all these people who are trained not to think are losing their jobs to automation.
Yeah, I don't know what the future will hold in that regard, as far as what will change with schools and what sort of changes automation will have on the economy. So, because I don't have any concrete knowledge or even opinions on that, my mind tends to wander off into the fantastical, and I start thinking of things like, well, like conspiracy theories, if you will. Like, well, maybe the answer to over automation is just to continue passing arbitrary laws so they can keep throwing people in jail. Like, it's the way around the supposed minimum wage being raised. You know, people talk about 15, no less than 15. It's like, well, how do you get around that? You just create an endless slew of laws so you can throw people in jail. Then you can pay them.
There's a guy running for president. His name is Andrew Yang. I don't know if you heard of him, but I think he's the best solution to all of this. But my question that goes further is, why aren't we taking the argument back to these institutions, like these universities and these schools? That amazes me. They can lie, they can bullshit, they can be full of crap. But when we leave, we're just getting frustrated about it. But we're not. Now kids are in there right now, and they're probably doing the same thing that you and I were doing, Daniel. So and it amazes me and it shocks me to no end that, like, a parent can see an older child that they had go to school and go to university end up with a lackluster minimum wage, anyone can do it job, and they have the other sibling that's growing up is going through that same process, and that same parent is telling them to go to university to not end up like the people who already went to university.
That's that laziness again. It's that we're comfortable with the generalities that we've been raised with, and we're just going to stick to those regardless of what the empirical data shows us. It's not about discovering the truth. It's about not rocking the boat for a lot of people, you know? Just letting the status quo march along in lockstep, and they pretend that the status quo will be able to maintain itself. But as you already pointed out, even these institutions are beginning to break apart. They can't even do what they want to do anymore. They can't even control people appropriately anymore because technology is advancing. Cultures are changing, but they're still stuck in this old system. They're not even controlling us as well as they could be.
Right. That's the thing. And we're just going to march it right off to a cliff. It's like you see a person marching off a cliff with being financially enslaved for the rest of their life, maybe with college debt. And then you're seeing, it's like they're marching, and then you see the people in line, and you're like, we're like doing this. Hey, there's a cliff, and they're all falling off that cliff. Go get out of this line, get out of that cliff. But they're all like, you know. And the next analogy I wanted to say is, like, imagine that you're in a building, and all of a sudden the ground is shaking or something happens, and like a slab of concrete that's on the roof falls off, crushes someone and kills them, and then people are just walking around, and then you're like, did you see that? That guy just died. That piece just fell on him and killed him. And then people are like, yeah, whatever. And then it's like, we got to get out of here. This whole place is going to collapse. And I'm like, yeah, it'll probably happen later. Whatever.
Yeah. Or their answer is, well, just don't stand in that one spot and you'll be fine. It's like, no, this is a structural problem. It's not isolated. This is going to happen to all of us in the aggregate unless we all step up and take responsibility for our position in it. We all have to leave the building.
Exactly. It's something else. But you see, like, that's why I do things like this. And it's like, because when you looked back and you looked at all this stuff, was there anything in your life that you kind of looked at and you always wanted to get accomplished, or a goal that you always wanted to do, but you thought to yourself, who do I talk to get there? What kind of resources do I need? How can I get there?
Now, I've always had trouble with these sorts of questions because I don't really think I've ever had a specific goal, like a big thing that I want to do. I've got more general ideas of a way in which I would like to live, I guess. But one thing that I can answer your question with would be when I was a kid, I got a little mock radio set where you could talk into it, and it had a little antenna, and you could even tune to a certain station on a real radio, and it would pick you up so long as you're in the same room as the thing. You know, it's essentially useless, but it was fun. And so I set up these little tape decks and would play little music songs, and then in between I'd say a thing, and I always thought that would be fun. And later on in life, I got into listening to podcasts, and I thought that was something that was along those same lines. I'm attracted to the audio media just as it flows, a sort of linear progression of information. And so now, directly because of autonomy, I did a few weeks ago, or well, yeah, 22 days ago, I did a radio broadcast, an internet radio broadcast that was only available to people in autonomy, just to sort of test the server I was working on, make sure my equipment was okay, and make sure it was something that I could actually manage to do live. And it worked out. It went for 6 hours, and I only forgot to turn my mic off once at the very end. But it pretty much went great, and it's something I want to do again. And as I said, it's something that I had wanted to do since I was a kid. Just broadcast, talk about things that I think are important, and then put in relevant, important information for people to just listen to. And what I like about part of the reason I wanted to do a radio broadcast as opposed to just uploading a podcast is that I think that in this day and age where everything is digital and on demand and permanently archived, you can just kind of, what do I want to listen to tonight? What am I kind of interested in right now? You could just go and pick it out, listen from the beginning to the end, and that's that. And I think that maybe in this high-tech era, we've lost sort of the spontaneity of just flipping through the stations and finding something new halfway through. What the hell is this? And you kind of get into it and you listen to it. And then, wow, you've discovered something new. And if we just go and, I think we're overly curate, well, is that a word? I think we overly curate our data.
Trying to control.
Yeah, it's overly controlled. And so I want to reintroduce the spontaneity and say, here, check this out. It's new. Maybe you've never heard it.
Right, because in real life there's no rewind button. You ever watch that movie with the remote with Adam Sandler where he could control everything?
Yeah.
So it's like, okay, I accidentally hit something off the table, whatever. I'm making a cake, I don't know, and then I can't just push the rewind button to like when I didn't do that. You know what I mean? I have to clean it up or have to do something.
All right, let me get an affiliate link for that remote when someone finally invents it.
Right, yeah, exactly. And it's like you can't just skip over the parts of your life that you don't want to be in. It's like, next chapter, I don't want to be 18, 20 there.
Well, we're stuck here and we just got to deal with it.
Right, exactly.
That's what we'll make the best.
That's interesting. And that's interesting you bring that up, because when I was going to community college, I took these broadcasting classes, and all of my professors were just kind of pontificating about where they've been and what they've done and how they did it and how much money they made. But none of them really said, this is how you get work. This is how you make money. This is nothing like that. It was ridiculous. So now that everything is changing, I opened up my YouTube page, I opened up my blog, I opened up the server so people can just come together and talk about these issues. Because what am I going to do? Go out to the mall? I live right next to the mall, and just stand in the middle of the mall and say like, hey, the school system is bad, and get like a big bullhorn? I mean, I could do that, but then people are just going to look at me weird.
Yeah.
But the thing, but here, it's on the internet, we can kind of have those conversations without like going out into the streets and people looking at us weird.
Mm-hmm.
You know what I'm talking about? And I also love science and technology. I volunteered at the California Science Center, and this is the reason why, I opened up my server. Eventually, I want to become a public speaker and a debater and have these conversations with more people and just get these ideas out there so people can learn to live lives that they want to live instead of living the lives that they think they have to live. I think that is the biggest difference. So I think if you and more people on that server got more active in more of the rooms and in more of the talks, and we did more things like this, we can have a fighting chance against this status quo and kind of create something that other people, instead of trying to shove it down their throats, they'll just be naturally interested in it. Is that something that you like being a part of?
Yeah, that's the idea. That's what I'd like to do because, as you said, just going out and standing on the street corner, it's not going to win anybody over. They're only going to think, oh, there's that crazy guy. And so when they, let's say you're talking about school, if they do wind up encountering some sort of criticism of the school system on the internet, they're going to associate it with that crazy guy in the corner and think, I don't want to read that. So I agree that the internet provides us with a great playground to curate our ideas and form them into a package that's accessible and then put it in an appropriate spot on the internet. So you don't just want to go egging people's houses with ideas, right? You have to some extent, they have to come to you. They have to be curious. You can't enforce curiosity any more than you can enforce good health. You just have to wait. And it's fine because there's no shortage of curious people. We could sit here and lament at how bad the situation is looking, how most people aren't interested. Sure, most people aren't, but that doesn't mean that there aren't hundreds of thousands who are. Mm-hmm. And so our hands are going to be busy. So we don't really need to go out of our ways to try to convince the really hard-boiled ones, the tough nuts to crack. We just make sure we're doing what we're doing this kind of thing, talking to other curious, interesting people. And if a newcomer happens to stumble by and say, hey, what's going on here? Then, of course, they're more than welcome to partake. So I think that the internet is a fantastic way to do that. It's probably the best, aside from maybe the idealized version of the Greek agora that I hold in my head, or Plato's Academy. Mm-hmm. Aside from that, the internet is probably the best.
You said about enforcing and making. That's what the school system does. It tries to enforce very low quality habits and intelligences into our minds. And if we resist, it labels us, it attacks us, it makes us, and it enforces us. And that's a great way, because then if we try to enforce this, then we'd be no better than what we're trying to fight against.
Right, we'd be sawing off the branch we're sitting on. And it's like, when school forces us to quote unquote learn or become educated, what they're really doing is training out of us our most valuable asset, which is the urge to resist force. And so the people who are, for whatever reason, naturally or maybe temperamentally inclined to just kind of be passive and not resist the school system, those are the kids that are going to be propped up and rewarded and moved along. Whereas those of us who, we don't really bend with the wind all that easily, we put up a fight, they're going to have to take a couple extra axe swings to us. And it's just training out of the aggregate of our society the all-important urge to resist force. We have to resist force. That's it. It's simple as that.
Right. And you heard the ones, they're like, oh no, if we do that, society will burn down and it will be destroyed. But look at all those people. All the people who resisted this force are the people who built up society. All the intellectually lazy and ignorant people are the ones that are going with the status quo that is tearing down society. Richard Branson, Albert Einstein, all these people who resisted this force did not burn the place down. In fact, they did the opposite. They created more for people to do and for people to love and for people to look at. But all the people in their laziness, like some government bureaucrats, they're the ones that usually gum up the works, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. I mean, aside from Einstein's participation in the atomic bomb program, I agree with you, and your point is taken.
Right. But
But
it's
yeah, I think that that's a completely false argument, and people say it all the time. If we didn't have this, if we didn't have that, then society would collapse. Well, I mean, the
isn't
old,
it collapsing right now though with all the automation? But
well,
all
yeah.
these institutions are so dysfunctional and so messed up. They are making society collapse.
Well, if we didn't have institutions that were allowed to murder, steal, rape, whatever, then people would murder, steal, and rape. It's like, what? You're doing the thing to prevent the thing you're doing. It doesn't make sense. And that's a sort of axiom, I guess, that's thrown around a lot in like anarchistic or voluntarist circles, where they point out the blatant hypocrisy of the state, be it in the form of the military or the police, where, let's say, for example, the American ideal is peace and democracy throughout the world. And in order to protect people from themselves, we're going to go over there and kill them or bomb them, whatever the current thing has to be. And it just fundamentally doesn't make sense.
Right, right. But I think when we are aware of these hypocrisies, that's when we can take steps and actions against them and to protect ourselves against these things. But when you're not aware of it and you don't know that it exists, it's like the invisible box, invisible chains that people don't see and people don't understand. They think they're free, but they wonder why they're so miserable sometimes. If you've ever seen that.
Well, there's no cure without a diagnosis. There are a lot of people out there who would rather just ignore things that make them feel unpleasant or negative. They have this,
Right.
which I think is a false and dangerous belief, that if we just focus on the positive, if we just feed the positive energy, then all the negative will kind of just vanish away. And I think that's absolutely wrong, because in order to actually come up with a cure, you have to diagnose the problem.
I mean,
that involves getting involved with the problem.
Like if you had a kind of like heart disease and you didn't go to the doctor, it doesn't mean it's just magically gonna go away.
Right.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah, exactly. So if you see a tsunami that's forming and you know it's gonna come in the next day or two, you just sit there at your house just being like, tsunami.
Yeah, quick, get your chimes and the sage. We all need to sit in a prayer circle. Stat.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, just leave.
Right.
Right, exactly. So I mean, we see, and now the tsunami is going to be automation and people losing these jobs that are repetitive cognitive and repetitive physical. So it's like these schools are basically throwing people into the unemployment tsunami.
Yeah.
It's unbelievable. I mean, it amazes me how intellectually lazy people are, but the best cure for that is for us to just grow what we're trying to do here.
I believe that. I believe that that is the truth, that we need, those of us who are curious enough and are beginning to walk the path of education about history and where we are now. The revolution is not going to come in any violent form and actually change anything. There's no point in going up and assassinating some yutz on Wall Street or in Washington or whatever. Some other yutz is going to come in and fill his place. So what needs to occur is a voluntary, that is non-forced, philosophical or intellectual, ideological revolution, and this is it. I'm not trying to bolster us any more than is necessary. I'm just pointing out that this is the sort of behavior, the transference of ideas, that is going to change people's minds. And so I think that what's necessary for us is to, one, see if we need to tailor our speaking abilities such that they become more accessible to just random people. Like, how do we slip these ideas into day-to-day conversations without being overbearing, but also without becoming like manipulative propagandists? How do we just say the truth or our perceived truth in a way that is not aggressive, but in a way that just opens up conversation. It says, hey, let's question these fundamental assumptions that we make.
Exactly. And nobody has to feel uncomfortable and nobody has to feel threatened. And
Mm-hmm.
that's not what we're trying to do. And in fact, the places that make me feel uncomfortable and threatened are when I'm in school. It's
Mm-hmm.
like, because it's like, you have so much stress. I have to get the A. I have to run here. I have to run there. I have to put this group project together. I have to, wait for this test. All of this, so we don't say like, hang on, let's put all that aside. What's really going on? And it's like they try to fill up our minds so much with these things, so we don't think about the things that you and I are talking about right now.
Yeah, there's no time. I mean, how could you? But aside from the school work that you're expected to do, a lot of people get involved in extracurricular stuff, not to mention the fact that your hormones are beginning to kick into high gear towards the end of schooling. All this crazy stuff is going on. You're learning to drive, you're getting a job like at McDonald's. Your life is just beginning to become the complicated mess that adulthood is. And right at that point, they say, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? Figure it out now.
Yeah.
Whoa,
Completely.
dude, I am 17. I don't know.
Yeah, it's completely unreasonable and idiotic. But before, remember what they told you? You no need to worry about all of that. You're not 17 or 18 yet. Hey, what am I going to do when I'm older? Don't worry about it. Don't worry about it. The minute you turn 18, what do you want to do?
Yep.
It's like, hey, asshole, shithead. It's my show. I can say anything. What happened before when you had all that time? Was your head up your ass? Were you smelling your own? What happened when I kept telling you when I was younger that I need to think about these things? You kept telling me to not worry about it. You didn't give me a transition period at all, and now you just expect me to know. It's like either you're stupid or you're evil. Either one of the two. So, yeah.
I think that part of it is for a lot of people older than us and previous generations.
Yeah.
I mean, they came up, they got the same thing, where it was like you go to school and then you get a job and you just figure it out. There's no.
But I was I was asking my teachers when I was in school, what does this have to do with the rest of my life? What does this have to do with the job? What does this have to do with anything? And they said, in some secret, mysterious way, when you're out of this and when you get older, you'll understand. And then that day came, and they were like, what do you want to do for the rest of your life? I'm like, hey, asshole, I told you that before, and you told me not to worry about it, and I'll figure it out. And then now that you were lying to me all those years, now it's my fault that what I told you before, what I was worrying about, wasn't relevant, and now you just think I should magically know. Congratulations, you won the dumbest person on earth award. Like, that's like,
that's the only context in our social lives where such an argument would even be entertained. I mean, you make sales, right? You do high ticket closing.
Right.
So imagine if you said to one of your prospects, they're like, okay, well, Ariel, what am I going to get out of this thing? And you're just like, just wait.
Right.
After you buy it, then you'll see.
Right.
And then they throw their money on the table. Nobody in the world would do that.
No way in the world. But these schools and these universities get away with it like clockwork. It amazes me.
It's a religion.
It shocks me. It's something. It's really something. But anyway, yeah. I'm just glad to have had you on, Daniel, and I can see that you understand things, and come talk in the philosophy server once in a while so we can spread the word and we can help people out, man.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm looking forward to being more involved on not just your Discord server, but also back on the autonomy. This past week or so, it's been rough for me to work out the time, but with the next 2 weeks at least, I should have some open times in my schedule. So I should be popping my ruffled collars up in the autonomy world once again.
Sir Francis Bacon.
Yep.
Anyway, that's awesome. Anyway, yeah, and I hope you have all learned like a ton from this. And any questions that you have, please feel free to reach out to me or to Daniel.
Absolutely. Ariel, thanks a lot for having me on. I appreciate it.
It was my pleasure, Daniel.
Very good. Have a good day.